Hey there, sports psych enthusiasts. I'm Dr. Colin Fehr, and I want to share my passion with you. I love talking about ways to unleash the power of the mind. This recording is part of a larger lecture series I've created in an effort to make sports psychology concepts more accessible to a larger audience. The information contained in this series is especially well suited for students of sports psychology and is presented in a way that makes for easy listening for all. Welcome to Sports Psych Concepts.
Hey there, everyone, and welcome to another Sports Psych Concepts presentation. I've got a good one for you today. Going to talk about theoretical orientations and different perspectives that we can adopt that really guide everything that it is that we're doing as a practitioner. Now, just like most of my presentations, I like to include a little caveat at the beginning mentioning that no, I'm not going to cover every possible approach that there is. I'll focus on more prominent approaches, cognitive behavioral, solution focused, maybe mindfulness-based interventions in this presentation. But know that there's more ways to go about it. There's more ways that you can, more theories, more paradigms that you can use to inform your approach. But I hope you get a lot out of this one. So just to introduce the idea a little bit more before I examine some of the specific theories, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page as to what a theoretical orientation is. And so to set the stage on that, I want you to think of it as really a set of guiding principles, or you could say a philosophical lens through which we view whatever it is that our client is presenting to us, their issues, their challenges, their struggles, those sorts of things. And so we use that filter essentially to help us conceptualize their challenges. And then it also provides a roadmap for the interventions that we're doing. Okay, so there's those two components of that. You think about a consultation session, we have how are we conceptualizing this? Are we having any personalizations, interactions that we're going in the here and now? And then what interventions are we coming up with to address how we're conceptualizing it? Okay, so that's really what it is we're doing. We're conceptualizing the challenges through our frame of reference, our theoretical frame of reference, and then we're using that to create a roadmap for our interventions. So with this in mind, I just want to mention this up front, and it'll be a theme that comes back around at the end, but I think it's important for us to understand that there's not really a single approach that's better than all the others, or just what I'm suggesting is maybe that's not the best way to think about this. Obviously, you could actually make an argument for that and say, well, there's a stronger evidence base for this particular approach than maybe some of the other approaches, or these other ones are more nascent in terms of evidence to support them, but they seem promising and it's logical and all of that. Okay, so just what I'm suggesting is that the most effective practitioners are often those who can be nimble, they're flexible in their approach, they can integrate different approaches to best meet the unique needs of each client. Okay, so rather than thinking about this as like we're going to compartmentalize this and talk about one particular theory, and we'll do that, we'll take a few of them in turn, one theoretical approach. It's important to say this up front, is that the best practitioners will weave bits and pieces of several theoretical frameworks rather than just a single approach. Okay, so now that we've got that set up, let's talk about one of the classics, right? CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And of course, when we're in the sports psychology or mental performance space, it's not, we can't really call it therapy, but we're just saying this is the framework that we're using as cognitive behavioral therapy as a theoretical orientation. And this is, of course, a dominant force in modern psychology, whatever the helping profession is that we're working at, be that traditional clinical psych or counseling work, social work, any of those things, certainly mental performance consulting. And at its core, cognitive behavioral therapy is really just built on this simple but but powerful premise, and that is that our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are all deeply interconnected. Okay, there's a link between those things. Our thoughts influence our feelings influence our behaviors. There's a link there. And the approach itself, our focus, if we're using this with clients, is to help them identify dysfunctional thinking patterns that might be holding them back. And then by exploring those thoughts and then perhaps even challenging those thoughts, we as practitioners can help our clients develop more functional and helpful ways of thinking, which then that in turn is what leads to more positive behaviors and emotional states. But the thoughts are at the core. Okay, and there's many different tools available to try and, from thought stoppage to cognitive reframing or cognitive restructuring. There's different terms that we can use right there, or use there to basically refute irrational thinking or destructive thinking patterns. There's all sorts of different terms, but we're targeting the thoughts. And we're trying to address that as sort of the critical piece. And that's the main thing to understand from this perspective. So now that we've got that understanding, let's look at CBT in the realm of applied sports psychology. So there's incredible value here, just like in other domains of psychology. And as I said, our focus here is on thoughts and behaviors. And, in the sports psychology world, that makes it a natural fit for addressing some of those common issues we see in sport and performance settings, like performance anxiety or negative self-talk. And so we have different tools available: confidence profiling, I mentioned thought stopping. Those are some classic examples of techniques that are based in CBT. And I mentioned at the beginning, there's no one approach that's better than the others, but you can make different arguments based on the evidence to support either, any framework that we're using. And CBT has a strong evidence base. It works. It's practical. It has a focus on the present rather than more like psychoanalytical perspective, psychodynamic, that are digging back into the past and understanding the why and all of those things. And that present focused nature, that resonates really well with athletes. They're looking for concrete, actionable solutions to their problems. Some of them may be more open to digging into some of those deeper things, but a lot of them is just like, hey, I just need some tools. This is what I'm trying to do. I want to perform better. And so CBT really lines up really well for them because they're kind of in their heads anyways. They're thinking about those things. They can tend to be in tune. And this works really well within that context. Okay, so let's shift now and talk about solution-focused brief therapy, or just solution-focused brief interventions or different approaches. There's different terms out there for this, but if we have to contrast this with CBT, we could say, well, maybe CBT, it's focusing on what's dysfunctional. These thoughts are not very helpful. We could say maybe they're hurtful thoughts in terms of performance. And so we want to address that because this is what's going wrong. Now, solution-focused approaches, it operates from the other end of the spectrum. Essentially, we operate from the practitioners who use this perspective, operate from the belief that clients already have the capacity to solve their own problems. And they often can do that without having to dive into the past to understand the origins of the problem. Okay, so the approach, instead of past, it's and really even present focused, it's future oriented. We're focusing on the client's strengths and moments when the problem isn't present, which is really important. So we look at exceptions to the problem. Well, when do you feel better than this? You're good, because people will come in and they're really good at talking about the problem, what's not going well, but there's almost always exceptions to that. They don't always feel depressed. Sometimes they may feel less depressed. They may still feel, oh, I always feel depressed. Okay, well, when do you feel slightly less depressed? And so that's the idea, is just shifting everything in that direction, and how do we get more of that in the future? So we're trying to, essentially the goal is to help the client envision their desired future. What is it that I want it to be? And then take small, concrete steps towards that vision. It's really time efficient. That's why you have the brief turns to solution focused brief therapy. This was born out of the whole original psychoanalytic movement that took years to get people to dig back in and understand their past and all these things that influenced how they are now. And it was like, whoa, that's like taking too much time, costs a lot of money. Maybe that's not really what's best for clients. How can we get them to move forward faster, spend less time? And so this was kind of born out of that. And so that time efficiency, it's great, highly suitable for brief interventions. Athletes tend to like this. Consultants tend to like this in sports psychology context, because it takes place on the sideline and on the bus ride or whatever different environments that they're in. And how can we just throw some quick little intervention in there that is really powerful? And so this theoretical orientation has become quite popular for many practitioners and athletes, performers, because of that. So let's talk about a few specific techniques then from the solution-focused brief therapy world. There's some good ones. I've kind of alluded to one or two already, but the first one, which is really a classic example, is called the miracle question. And essentially what you do here as a practitioner is you ask the client to imagine that some sort of miracle has occurred overnight. Like say imagine that tonight you go to bed and a miracle occurs. So you overnight while you're sleeping, you wake up in the morning and your problem is gone. What's the first thing that you notice when you start your day, or you arrive at practice, or you begin your warm up, or you do whatever, right? What's the first thing you notice? And so you get them imagining, they're adopting that frame of mind as if that problem is gone. They put themselves there, and that can be really powerful. You're just leveraging their imagination. They talk about what that would be like. And then you can build a conversation around that, and they start to try that on, and that can be really, really cool, because I've never imagined that before. Okay, but it helps reframe their thinking, and without really talking about their thinking and the thoughts that they're having, like CBT would use, and really identify what their desired future is. So that's kind of a cool one, simple one. We also can use scaling questions and exception questions. I kind of mentioned this as well. And so both of these things, we're focusing on our clients' successes. Okay, no matter how small they are, we're trying to build momentum toward their goals. So a scaling question would be, okay, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you at on your performance right now? And they say, okay, well, I'm at a 4. And you say, all right, well, what's it going to take to get you to a 5? What's one thing you could do today to move you closer to a 5? And athletes, this really resonates because they usually can identify something, because that's not a huge, it's just movement in the direction they want. They're thinking, oh, I'm at a 4 and I should be at a 10. Like, all right, well, there's distance, there's numbers between 4 and 10 that we have to pass along the way. So what's one thing we can do to a 5? It's like, oh man, 5 feels like too big of a jump. How can we get to a 4.5? How can we get just a half a bump of improvement? And that's really powerful. Athletes, that tends to resonate with them. And exception questions, I already kind of talked about that. Just when is the problem not happening, and what is it that you're noticing about those times in your life? And so they start to raise their awareness about that. Okay, maybe it isn't a full-on problem, but there is a connection here with positive psychology. And this is something that I definitely could talk more about, and probably will. But the focus of solution focused brief therapy, as far as a framework, is we're focusing on what's working. And that aligns closely with the principles of positive psychology. There's a bunch of overlap there. So remember I said at the beginning, when I have this kind of integrative, holistic approach, this is kind of a nice link between the two theoretical orientations. So let's shift now then and talk about mindfulness. This is definitely one of those things that many consider to have transformed psychology over the last few decades. Just a really powerful, useful tool that kind of originated in Eastern philosophies and religions, and then it's been somewhat secularized in Western psychological movements. But there's an incredible value there in the context of applied sports psychology. So at its core here, the idea is that we are when we are mindful, we are paying attention to the present moment with a non-judgmental attitude. So we're just noticing what's going on. We're not saying that it's good, we're not saying it's bad, we're just noticing it, we're experiencing it. We are present. Okay? And so as I said, historically, I mean, the roots here, it's in ancient meditative practices, but there's profound impacts on both mental well-being and the performance side of the spectrum. So for athletes, mindfulness, it can really be a powerful tool for managing anxiety, which is a big thing that athletes deal with, but also staying focused on the task at hand, staying present, being in the moment, and regardless of whatever external distractions or internal thoughts that they're having there. So despite its roots, it has lots of applications in the modern performance context. So now let's mention a few mindfulness-based interventions. And there's a lot that has come out on this. And as I said, I'm going to focus more on looking at mindfulness as a theoretical orientation rather than digging into some specific models. I'll mention the mindfulness acceptance commitment approach, which has a strong evidence base within the literature, and then there's other mindfulness based intervention programs that you can look at that are geared specifically toward sport and performance enhancement. But the framework of that I want to mention, the reason I'm mentioning mindfulness acceptance commitment as a specific framework is because it combines mindfulness with those other two key principles, acceptance and commitment. Okay, and you think of acceptance and commitment therapy, that could be another thing that's definitely tied in right here. That's a theoretical orientation that I use in my work with athletes. But essentially it's not just the mindfulness thing, the noticing, there's also acceptance. So acknowledging our thoughts and feelings, even the negative ones, without trying to fight them, right? It's like they're here, it's a thought. Thank you for that mind. Whatever the thought was, there it was. And then commitment is about taking action that's aligned with our values. So even when we're faced with discomfort, so I can be in an uncomfortable situation because I got a little bit of anxiety about performing, and I'm mindful, I'm noticing that, I'm experiencing that, I'm also accepting it, and then I'm committed to still taking action based on what I value, what's important to me. And so you can see how that's really, really important because those principles together, they help the athlete shift their focus from worrying about the outcomes and whether they're going to win or lose or be rejected or accepted by their parents or teammates or whatever. They don't want to let anybody down, so they shift away from that to now they're engaging in the process of their performance. And as we know, the process is what leads to the outcome. The process improves performance, and if we have improved performance, we increase the odds that we have the outcomes that we want. So a powerful process overall. Now, as I alluded to a little bit earlier with the connection between solution-focused brief approaches, they're linked to positive psychology. I want to mention just a couple of things about this because this is somewhat new in terms of its applications in the sports psychology space. And I mean, I guess some would argue with that, and so I guess the point that I'm making is just the evidence base isn't as strong yet in that particular realm. It is in other areas, but not so much as in sport applications. There is an increasing interest in research in this area, so I'll just couch everything that I'm saying with that backdrop. But the idea here is that historically, coaching and sports settings working with athletes, the focus was on essentially it was deficit based coaching, saying like this is what's going wrong and this is how we're going to fix your weaknesses. So positive psychology flips that in the other direction. It's about spotting athletes' strengths and then exploiting those strengths. So rather than focusing on fixing the weaknesses, we want to encourage them to also use their strengths. And this isn't to say that improvement can't come from improving our weaknesses. Obviously it can. It's just that that shouldn't be the only thing that athletes are working on. They should also work on their strengths. They should be encouraged to leverage their strengths. So indeed it is a strengths based approach. So some specific tools, types of questions that you could ask here is well, what are your strengths? What are you good at? What are your greatest strengths or your top skills that you have? What do you most look forward to when you go to a training session or you go to some sort of event where you're going to compete? What things are you most proud of? How do you want other people to see you out there? What do you want them to what do you want to exude as your strengths as you're out there? And so this is the shift, right? Not so much about what's wrong, the problem talk, what's growing well, how can we get more of it? Now, one example that I've used with some athletes is taking even something that they may consider a weakness or they're not doing it very well, and basically flipping that and just saying, well, everything's a continuum, right? So it's not really that it's a weakness, it's that it is a lesser strength right now. So how do we get more of that? You already have some of it. You already have some capacity to do this. How do we get more of that? And then instead of them saying, oh, I'm horrible at this, I'm not good at that at all, these are my strengths and everything else I suck at, right? It's saying, okay, well, so these are your top strengths and these are your lesser strengths. So how do we get more of these lesser strengths? Continue to develop the other things, but everything is a strength, right? Everything is a strength, just to different degrees. So that's a primary idea behind this, and a lot of utility in the sports psychology space, which is why I mention it here. All right, so now that I have mentioned those primary theoretical orientations that I wanted to mention, even though, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's not an exhaustive list. These are a few that you can imagine are close to home for me because I tend to use them, and a lot of other practitioners use them, but there's not the only approaches to practice that we can use. And so all of these are value, they have demonstrated value, but they're not without their critiques. So to make sure I provide some balance to the presentation here, I want to present some of those. So regarding cognitive behavioral therapy, some argue on this that the focus on thought restructuring may not actually be deep enough, or it may not be enough to address deep-seated issues or past trauma, right? Because it's just surface level. We're just focusing on the thoughts in the present moment and what it is that's there, and we're not really digging in at the core. Okay, so there's one of the critiques for CBT. Solution-focused brief approaches, so obviously can be effective for many issues, but same as like CBT, maybe not as appropriate for complex clinical presentations that could require a deeper dive. And mindfulness, so this one, just like the others, can be powerful, but can be misinterpreted as like, well, so we're just is this a relaxation technique, when in reality it requires consistent practice. It's not just a technique, right? You don't want clients to feel like you're just giving them a technique and here's just this thing. Like it's a framework, it's a frame of operation and how we're approaching situations. And then positive psychology, we want to make sure we avoid what's called illusory optimism, where there's just not really this balance with reality. It's like, oh, everything's a strength and it's a feel good, when in reality there's some things where it's like, well, maybe we should just call that what it is, and it's a weakness. It's not just some lesser strength, like maybe they don't really have that capacity at all. And so that is a criticism of that approach. And so with all of that in mind, like I said, I just want to provide some balance and different perspective on these, because no approach is going to be totally foolproof. But the effectiveness of any approach that we use is going to be tied to the practitioner's skill and self-awareness of these limitations, which again is why I think it's important to mention it. Okay, so now that we've considered all of these primary theoretical orientations, the ones at least that I've shared with you, looked at some of their strengths, looked at some critiques, different considerations, I want to pitch to you this idea of an integrative approach. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, so I'll expound on it. So essentially, instead of choosing a single approach, many practitioners really find success with an integrated model. So just for an example on this, you could use a solution-focused approach in the first session with a client, first or second session, to establish some goals really quickly. And then you could use some CBT techniques to teach some specific mental skills like self-talk, right? And then you finally, after that, you could bring in some mindfulness practices to help the athlete apply those skills under pressure. So this is what I mean by an integrated approach. And so when we use this approach, we can actually be more flexible. We're offering a more holistic service delivery that can be customized or tailored to the unique needs and the preferences of each of our athletes who we are working with. So this integrative, sometimes you hear holistic, sometimes you hear an eclectic approach. That's what I'm getting at here. So how do we put it all together? Well, let me give you a little brief case study to consider on what this might look like. Okay, this is always kind of fun to think of examples here. So imagine you've got a basketball player. They're struggling with performance anxiety, particularly during free throws. All eyes are on them. The game stops. They're at the free throw line. So what might that look like if we're using these a few of these orientations that I talked about? So first, with cognitive behavioral therapy, if we're using that approach, we're going to try and identify what their negative thoughts are, and then use some sort of techniques like thought stopping or reframing, restructuring to make their thoughts more functional. If we're using a solution focused approach, we might focus on the times when they have successfully made free throws. Well, when has it gone well? When have you been in that situation where you've executed, you've been the way you want it to be? So we could use scaling there. We track some small improvements to see where they're at on what times when it goes better than others, right? And then a mindfulness-based approach would just focus on helping them stay calm in the moment, so they can stay focused there, and they're using breathing techniques at the line regardless of the outcome. We're not emphasizing that. We're just being present, noticing, experiencing. Okay, and so that would just be one example. If I'm using a more integrative approach, I might try and weave some of these things together and use them, but to really drive this idea home of how our actual work that we're doing with clients might look different depending on what our approach is. Hopefully this example makes that a little bit clearer for you. So with all of that, let's wrap everything up so you've got your key takeaways after this. This is a lecture after all, so I do like to provide a summary, but just an overarching idea, right? We need to have a strong theoretical foundation in the work that we're doing. Indeed, that's essential for sports psychology practitioners. So by understanding the core tenets of the different approaches that I mentioned today with CBT or solution focused or positive psychology and mindfulness, we understand those things. That's allows us or helps us effectively conceptualize what our client is dealing with. You remember me mentioning that earlier. It's about conceptualizing it. But then also, it helps us be flexible in our ability to then integrate these different approaches so we can meet the needs of the athlete. And all in all, if we want to be the most effective practitioners, our approach, it always needs to be client-centered. So even though we have these theoretical orientations that are kind of guiding us, we don't want that in itself to get in the way of meeting what our clients need. And so we need to engage in continual learning. We expand our theoretical toolkit so we can apply more of those things, those different tools that are available in each of these frameworks to do that as effectively as we can. So that is all I have for this presentation. Thank you for listening. Wish you the best of luck. Hopefully this was helpful for you.
Thank you for listening to this recording in the Sports Psych Lecture Series. I hope you learned something. More importantly, I hope you learned something that you can apply in your life. Feel free to share this presentation with others who might be interested. And if you're interested in more content like this, visit the Fehr Advantage channel on YouTube or find the Fehr Advantage podcast on Spotify or visit my website at fehradvantage.com.